There are few places on the interwebs that you can actually find real comic book journalism anymore. One of them is ICV2.com. I will fully admit that. It looks at comic books from more of a business perspective. It's not all the fluff pieces. It's not really clickbait articles and stuff like that. It's pretty serious journalism. It's not the biggest site in the world, but it is something that I like to check out. They do have an opinion maker there. His name is Rob Salkowitz, and he does have some interesting articles from time to time. This week, he wanted to talk about how comic book journalism died, basically admitting it is dead. Now, I don't think comic book journalism is dead. I will agree that it's certainly dead in pop culture and comic book websites. Nobody really goes to that stuff anymore. It's very, very hard to find. And if you go to a lot of those sites, there just isn't much to them anymore. Almost all of it's like AI generated articles and stuff like that. But I do think comic book journalism is alive and well, especially on places like YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, people going out there, citizen journalism at its best, doing the job that they failed to do to begin with. And he makes some really good, compelling arguments in here that I cannot dismiss outright. In fact, a couple of them are absolute gospel. These things did happen, and they certainly did affect the bottom line and the availability and the widespread proliferation of comic book journalism, if you want to call them that. But in my opinion, comic book journalism had been dead for a long time. Google just kind of buried it in the end. They were basically just the coup de grace. But he makes some good points here. But I do think he's missing out on one key point, never mentioned in his article. I'll definitely get to it. And when I get to it, I think you guys are going to recognize it too. It's going to be a big eye-opener. Stick around for that one, because we do have to point out the stuff he's absolutely right on first, and then I'm going to blow your minds. He talks about it wasn't an accident, it was murder. Rob Salkowitz opens the piece by pointing directly at Google, not as a neutral search engine, but as a gatekeeper with its own survival in mind. We may think of Google as a technology company, he writes, but it's not. It's an advertising company. Just look where the revenue comes from. Early on, Google helped send readers to comic news sites through traditional search traffic, but now it's cutting them out entirely. Google has lined up the kill shot against journalism. AI summarization, Salkowitz writes, referencing Google's move to provide quick answers on the top of the search results, effectively eliminating the need for users to ever click the original article. There is no doubt at all that Google did bury comic book websites that were pretending to be journalists, within the last 12 to 18 months. But they didn't just, kill comic book websites. They basically killed everything. Essentially, all the entities in that ecosystem, whether you were a gamer website, you were a pop culture website, maybe you were a biking enthusiast website, any type of stuff like that, all their advertising rates just died because all the clicks stopped when Google essentially stopped sending you there. And they did it on purpose because they don't want to send search traffic to websites. They want to keep it in their own ecosystem, and they are looking to generate ad revenue on people being on their website, so they're no longer sending you to other places. And yes, the AI tool that comes up whenever you ask a question, where it basically gives you the AI generated answer, but it goes to the original source material, reads it for you, and just spits it out without you ever going there, certainly was not a friendly thing to do on the part of Google. And if you see your favorite website going down or laying people off, or maybe not putting out as much material. And we are certainly seeing that across the comic book ecosystem when it comes to web traffic. You can absolutely blame Google. They performed the coup de grace on everybody. All of their traffic essentially has died over the last 18 months, and it was all by design by a very greedy company in Google. Now, this isn't the beginning or the only problem that comic book journalism has. In fact, I think this was dead long before that. But there's another thing that happened along the way that's also technology related. And as Rob Salkowitz puts it, social media is piling onto the problem. According to Salkowitz, social media platforms are no longer the reliable traffic engines they once were. Twitter, is deprioritizing tweets with links to external content in its algorithm, while Facebook has also basically taken its ball and gone home in terms of allowing link sharing to get reach. These platforms now actively suppress content that sends users elsewhere unless creators pay to boost it. That puts pop culture news sites in a chokehold. They either pay to be seen or vanish from readers' feeds entirely. It is 100% and has been, especially on Facebook, for a long time, a pay-to-play ecosystem. When you go to Facebook and you follow like 500 people and you see nothing of them every single day, It's because none of your friends are paying Facebook to boost their posts, whether it be their family photos or just random thoughts and stuff like that. And they're basically treating everybody like this. That's why Facebook is the most useless social media website I've ever fucking seen in my life. I am literally just there to have fun conversations and see pictures of my nieces and nephews and my brothers and my dad and all that stuff. And I never see it. I don't even look at Facebook anymore. And they started doing this a long time ago. Facebook used to be the number one driver of traffic to websites like a Newsarama, a Bleeding Cool, the Comic Speed, and ICV2.com. As people would share links, the articles would become viral and everything. And that's really a lot of the reason that Facebook got that stranglehold on social media and everything. And they basically have gotten rid of all of that, because if you're not paying them to boost your presence on Facebook, to have your links boosted out there and actually let people see them, essentially nobody will see them. And Twitter is following a very similar monetization route that is basically cut out a lot of these websites because they are small websites. They're working on thin margins. Not exactly the most popular interest out there when you talk about comic books. So sites like a Newsarama, a Bleeding Cool, a Screen Rant, sites like that, they don't exactly have the largest marketing budget, and they're not really able to pay the piper when it comes to Facebook and Twitter to become or remain relevant on social media. There's no doubt that Google, Facebook especially, and certainly Twitter have totally fucked all these people over and all these websites. It's not just a comic book thing. It's essentially an everything thing. But the interesting thing about all of this is before all those changes happened and Google really screwed everybody over and Facebook had already screwed everybody over and Twitter is following suit, comic book journalism had basically already died. They'd essentially already killed their own industry with the way that they were conducting themselves. And this kind of all ties into what Rob Sakowitz calls the enshittification floats downstream. Sakowitz sums it up bluntly. We've reached the terminal stage, a few good pieces floating in a sea of clickbait and AI sludge. With Google and social media starving sites of visibility, most outlets have turned to low-effort, high-volume content just to survive. AI-generated junk, recycled press releases, and fluff articles dominate feeds. Even when a quality piece slips through, it's buried under the algorithm sludge. Readers aren't just underserved, they're insulated. The problem is, all that low-effort, high-volume, sludge, press releases, fluff articles has been dominating the comic book journalism ecosphere for over a decade at this point. Comic book journalism is just basically clickbait, lazy speculation, PR for the actual publishers themselves. And that's basically because that's how the system just is designed and operates now. Because here's the dirty secret that he's not really talking about, and certainly Mr. Sakowitz is aware of. If you go back to, I don't know, the 90s, Wizard Magazine. I would love to have a Wizard Magazine today. But there's a reason Wizard Magazine died. Because people lost their faith in their integrity. Because after a while, you're working at Wizard Magazine, you're writing articles, you're kind of being a trendsetter, maybe a little bit of a gatekeeper, and you're working a little bit too closely with all those comic book pros. And all of a sudden, maybe one or two Wizard Magazine writers jumps over. And people see Wizard Magazine as a path to comic book writing or art or something like that. And all of a sudden, everyone working at Wizard Magazine isn't looking out for the fans. They're not talking about what's the best thing out there. They're out there kissing all the publishers' asses. And this has persisted for a very fucking long time. And I'm not surprised that Mr. Sakowitz just let that one escape his mind, that they had already basically shot themselves in the foot. You might not know this, but there have been several high-profile writers in the comic book industry that used this path to superstardom or just getting jobs because they didn't want to write about comic books. They didn't want to tell you what was the best thing out there. They didn't want to be honest and objective in their assessment of what Marvel and DC were doing. They wanted jobs. They wanted a foot in the door. Have you heard of Gail Simone? She used to write for websites, the fridging stuff, so she could get over and get a foot in the door at DC Comics. Have you heard of Donny Cates? Remember, he was the future of Marvel Comics. And I think Donny Cates is a good writer. He wrote for Bleeding Cool at a time. Do you think Donny Cates, as a Bleeding Cool writer, whose dream job was to work at Marvel Comics, was ever going to tell you the truth about whether what Marvel was doing was good or not? Perhaps you've heard of Kelly Thompson. She's right now an absolute Wonder Woman. also started out on all those stupid websites like Newsarama and CBR and stuff like that. Not because she was really interested in providing an honest, unbiased presentation of something that was going on in the industry, but because she wanted to work in comic books. She wanted a writing gig, and she saw that as the way to get in there. The latest example that I know of, I guess, is Steve Fox. Steve Fox is objectively terrible. He works in comic books because he wrote fluff pieces for these publishers, and they welcomed him with open arms. And people see that. People tend to notice when the opinions that are being served aren't authentic, when they're actually bullshit and they're being lied to just so somebody can get a job somewhere else. The best example I have in my life is not even comic book news and stuff like that. I used to watch Collider TV essentially every single day. They would have the Collider TV show, and they would have a couple of other like theme shows. There was a Star Wars show, there was a comic book movie show, there was a horror show. I watched them all because I trusted Collider News. I kind of liked the hosts that they had. I liked Mark II D2. I liked a lot of the people, Schnepp, they were all great. But the moment they got to The Last Jedi review, and every person on that panel, I think there was 4 or 5 of them, including the biggest Star Wars nerds that they had, said it was an amazing movie. And it just clicked in my head. Fuck, these guys were just at the red carpet for this movie. These opinions are not real. They are bought and paid for, because there's no way in this world you could find 6 lifelong Star Wars fans that thought The Last Jedi was just fucking great. Sure, maybe 1 or 2 of them are such homers, they would forgive it for all of its misdealings. And that is a terrible movie. But the moment I realized none of their opinions were real and they were all full of shit, I walked away and I've never watched a Collider video again. And this is what those fuckers did to themselves by not providing honest opinions and real news about the industry, not holding it to task, not saying it's not doing great when it's not doing great, or even saying that it's great when it is doing great. They knew there was no objectivity, because working at these sites and being a journalist was just a step to becoming a comic book writer. And they killed themselves already. The last thing that Rob Sokowitz covers in the article, he calls the supply and demand issue. The final nail isn't just about platforms and revenue, it's about relevance and trust. Publications depend on revenue, Sokowitz writes, but if you choke off the revenue, the content starts to suffer. But at some point, the question becomes, was the content ever valuable in the first place? But rather than reflect on how that trust was lost, mainstream media comics is floating a solution that would only make the problems worse. Industry veterans like Heidi MacDonald and Adam Chapman argue that the only path forward is for the publishers themselves to support comics journalism. Do we really believe that would be the fix? Heidi MacDonald and the Comics Beat are already only writing fluff pieces about Marvel and DC comics. What do we think would happen if Marvel and DC were her primary revenue generators as her advertisers? She would become even more of a shill if that was even possible. No, we should not be pushing publishers and journalists together closer. We should be driving them apart. That is the ultimate solution, and that is how they lost their credibility in the first place. And I am not surprised for a second that somebody as stupid as Heidi MacDonald thinks the answer to comics journalism is that we should all be working for Marvel and DC Comics. Put us on the fucking payroll. Yeah, that will work great. Then our coverage would be completely unbiased. We would know that they were telling us the truth the entire time. If the answer to how do we get better comics journalism is we actually need to get in bed with the publishers even more and take it doggy style, that is no solution whatsoever. That is how you got here in the first place. And if Mr. Sokowitz was a little bit more critical in his thinking, a little bit more open to how all these problems began in the first place, he never would have put anything that fucking stupid in his article. Certainly he has some points that you cannot deny. Google fucked everybody. Facebook fucked everybody. Twitter's starting to fuck everybody. But comic book journalists had already fucked themselves and their entire industry by not being honest, by being in bed with the publishers and being sycophants, lying about everything, saying everything was great. Isn't that Heidi MacDonald's favorite thing to say? The comic book industry's never been better, as we saw sales tanking across the board. It's absolute insanity from my perspective and on this end of comic book journalism. But then when you think about it, Heidi MacDonald would like to be being paid directly for Marvel and DC because she basically already is their own personal PR arm, along with Newsarama, along with Screen Rant, along with CBR, along with comicbook.com, along with Bleeding Cool, who actually are a little bit more honest than some of these other people that I've talked about here today. Bleeding Cool actually will put some negative stuff out there every once in a while. but they fucked themselves. They put themselves in this position, and they were basically dead long before Google buried them for good. If you like this kind of honest conversation about comic books, whether it be the news, opinions, reviews, all that kind of stuff, there are very few places that you can actually get unbiased opinions and information. Here's one of them. If you would like to help us with that mission, keep the lights on, keep the videos flowing, the best place to do that is Think Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. Because I don't want to be funded by Marvel and DC. I want to be funded by you guys. I want to maintain my ability to be an independent journalist, and I can only do it with you guys. Hope to see you there very soon.